In emergency management, the definition of a stakeholder is any person or entity with a vested interest in the survival or recovery of a given community.
This is the Stakeholder Prepping Podcast, where the tactical comes from the practical, and today, you become your own stakeholder.
Here are your hosts, Chris and AC.
Welcome back to Stakeholder Prepping, where you, yes, you are the stakeholder in your own survival. And today we're getting into a side of preparedness that a lot of people either ignore completely or just misunderstand in a big way. We're talking about chemical, biological, radiological, and nuclear threats. Not from a fear standpoint, but from a practical, real-world perspective.
Yeah, and this is one of those topics where people either go full denial, like nothing's ever going to happen to me, or they go full-on panic mode. And I think neither one of those really helps you out. So the reality sits somewhere in the middle. And I think that's what we're going to try to unpack today. And before that, Chris, I just realized that you and we both wore the same T-shirt to the prom.
We did.
Yeah.
So one of us is going to have to change.
One of us is going to have to go change. Well, we can talk about the cool T-shirt later. But anyway, yes. Who do we have with us today, Chris?
Yeah, to help us go through all of this CBRN mess and fiasco, we've got actually George Sichler joining us. He is a retired NYPD Special Operations Division detective. He is a fire EMS provider, CBRN instructor, and now working in preparedness education with MIRA Safety. So, George, welcome to Stakeholder Prepping.
Thank you so much, guys. And I did notice the T-shirts. I didn't know if it was like a uniform or something. I
No. This is one of our. We've got a few T-shirts on the store, and we're going to send you some of these anyway. But this is anybody who is a veteran or a prepper or a MRE aficionado will recognize the design. It's the design from the side of the MRE box and the heating instructions. But instead of the rock or something, it says destroyed rubble of the FEMA headquarters or something.
Now that because it's hard for me to see on the screen, but I will say that those have been a lifesaver multiple times because it's hard to find them with the heating element.
Right.
You just buy them kind of randomly. So I've come across a bunch of them in my career for some stuff, and heating element makes it all worthwhile.
Yeah, we will send you the limited edition T-shirt of your
100%.
choice. But before we do that, we want to start where we always do. So let's get to know you kind of outside of your credentials. You know, what pulled you into this world and what made you stay in it?
So it's a bit of it's a long story, but I'll give you the elevator pitch on it. So when I started in the special operations world, I guess in any big city law enforcement capacity, anybody, especially after 9/11, you got some sort of, let's call it CBRN training. And then when I went into special ops, that level was increased a little bit. Then I ended up, because of my specialty being in maritime special operations, we ended up doing a lot of work with the SEAL community. And we were doing a project with a guy, long story short. He had invented the CBRN decon capability for Dev Group, Special Warfare Development Group, commercialized it from there. And then I was just one of those young guys at the time. He's like, hey, would you like to come on this road trip with us? And I said, sure. So I was kind of in that world, for a little bit. And then kind of running around in that group, cross-pollinating across that special ops CBRN world. And then the team needed somebody to go to hazmat school. So I ended up getting my technician on that because I was like, well, I'm already in the space. Then I ended up doing that. And then kind of long story short, I ended up becoming really good friends with, when I was a team guy, with my vendors, who was that retired SEAL and another Navy diver, and just kind of been running with those guys ever since. So, when I retired, I was fortunate to have a couple of different specialties, and CBRN is not one of the popular ones, but I had that. And then I also spoke firearms and tactics. And I'm also a medic, so I could do medicine as well, like TCCC and trauma. So I've been doing that as a volunteer, I probably started in 1990 or 1991. But I spoke all three of those languages, which kind of gave me the ability to work in different spaces after retirement. So after I retired, I kind of brushed off the dust and went back and actually got my upgraded certificates or certifications after just the state ones. I think they have a national one. I think it's called Pro Board. So I ended up doing that. And just kind of the rest is history. It's just not one of those sexy tactical spaces, but because I had some experience in it, it made me valuable. And, ended up as just a retired, New York City detective working on some international contracts in that CBRN space with larger, defense contractors, et cetera. And, I spent last June in Greece, teaching it. Supposed to go to Thailand in December, but the government shutdown didn't fund the US based instructor. So I missed out on Thailand last year, but a couple of events coming up in the near future. So, and those are really interesting because again, just in those three different languages that I speak, medicine, tactics, and CBRN, I get to see how people and units and agencies do their thing across the globe. And then I can bring that back to the people that I work with and say, hey, that's really good. I saw this in LA, or I saw this in Miami, or I saw this in Greece. Did you ever think about that? And it gets those guys and gals to just start thinking about a problem in a different way. So just, that was really one of the fortunate things that I was able to do, just be being somebody that went out there and always wanted to learn more.
Very cool.
That's awesome. And then so how did the MIRA Safety thing, how did that develop? Where did that come from?
Yeah, so I was in the decon space. I was in the TCCC medical space upon retirement. Got an opportunity kind of in like the chemical, let's call it chemical decon space, for another manufacturer. Brought that technology to MIRA, and got a look behind the curtain of MIRA Safety, and I was like, this is a really good company here with some really good products. And then Roman was a really nice guy, and we just kind of started talking. And I kind of, we kind of played. I guess we both played a little hard to get at first, um, but then at the end of the day, it just kind of worked out, and they brought me on as like a new products development guy because I speak those languages. So, again, I know at the end of the day, the Mira customer, they like tactical content, and then I can speak. The only language I really don't speak is explosives, like EOD, just an awareness level and that kind of thing. But because of the other things that in that preparedness space, you just start at the lowest level of like situational awareness and then kind of scale it up from there into different, tactics, firearms, medicine, and CBRN. It was a good spot for me. So one of the things that I do is go around and educate the public on preparedness, and everything from your individual situational awareness to some other, higher level things.
That's crazy. So you actually mentioned explosives, and so I've tangentially work around CBRN stuff, and the E is always kind of there. It's like CBRN, but the E is silent. Like when did we
Right.
drop? When did we
Yeah.
drop the explosive from CBRN? When did those things get a divorce? Is that a newer thing?
So it's a newer thing that I've seen it attached. And what I'll say is this: I don't know how old you guys are, but I'm old enough that it used to be called NBC,
Right.
nuclear, biological, chemical.
Mm-hmm.
Also stood
Yep.
for, if you're in the industry, nobody cares, right? And I think the reason why they got rid of it was because of that moniker. It was one of those check boxes that big DOD and stuff would have to kind of just have that association with that capability. And then I guess in the first responder world after 9/11, it started to be called WMD, or weapons of mass destruction. And then it got that CBRN. And then, in my opinion, it's Navy EOD, who's the tip of the spear in that CBRN world. And they're kind of like that, really the forward most active, progressive, et cetera. And the rest of the communities kind of look to Navy EOD for that. And then I think because of that, there's the E at the end of it. It's just my opinion. And then a lot of different bomb squads will have that attachment to CBRN because of the weaponization potential of that explosive with a weapon of mass destruction. Just my opinion. But that's, I see it. Sometimes it's a lowercase e, but I do see it kind of across the board. Yeah.
Okay, and yeah, I think you're right because we're talking about things that all are exposure related, and then somebody lumped in explosives with those, which isn't really an explosive thing. Like you're not really going to die by touching gunpowder. It's the explosion part that's the bad part. The rest of it is all exposure based. But I just think that's funny that sometimes we see it that chemical, biological, radiological, nuclear, and then explosives. It's kind of like the ATF. It just doesn't make sense lumping them all together.
Yeah, it
Well,
turns from the
ATF.
ATF into bat fee.
Right.
Exactly, right? And I think too, if you think about, again, I'm not an explosives guy, so to speak, right? In my unit, we had some, we did some more recognition, and then we actually would turn over anything like that to Navy EOD. We were in a render safe group, but um, you could use that explosive as a dispersal device. Now, again, that dispersal device isn't necessarily going to disperse everything because of the explosion and the fire. And again, I'm not an explosives guy, but you'll burn up some of that source that you're looking to kind of put out there. But again, just my opinion, I think that's why they did that, so to speak.
Interesting. Okay.
So, what would you say is something that civilians or people that aren't familiar with the CBRN space, CBRN, CBRN, again, that's chemical, biological, radiological, and nuclear. Um, what would you say that people get dangerously wrong about these CBRN threats right out of the gate?
Well, right off the bat, right, we could talk about a CBRN event as being COVID. Now, again, not getting into the politics behind that, but that was a global biological event, weaponized or not. Again, we won't go down that path, but that was certainly a CBRN event that it affected the entire globe. I usually focus more on the chemical side. This kind of always appealed to me a little bit more because you can go into any Home Supply, Home Depot store, and you can make a WMD out of it, out of that kind of thing. But um, when I break it down as far as a training world, I break it down into three categories as far as chemicals. The first being chemical warfare. And again, I'm not really concerned about Russia lobbing a 155 howitzer round into downtown Manhattan with mustard gas on it. Okay. We talk about then a chemical attack, and a chemical attack being something along the lines of like a Tokyo sarin gas attack, right? A lot of people are familiar with that one.
Mm-hmm.
But then a chemical incident where not nefarious in intent, but there's some sort of a chemical release, like we were just talking about prior to we going live here. But East Palestine, Ohio, right? Not nefarious in intent, but certainly a chemical release that affected tons and tons and tons of people. So those are the kind of the three ways that I'll break it down into kind of like training, and then you could break that down even further. But as far as the first responder world, we look at that chemical attack, and there are incidents of that. And I was very, I always, my brain's always going. And if you look at it was probably about 2 months ago now, but there was the incident with Ilhan Omar where they sprayed vinegar on her. Okay. Now, at the end of the day, vinegar is a very, very mild toxic industrial chemical. Had that tick or toxic industrial chemical been more potent, you would have had a much larger incident, right? With cross contamination and the hysteria that could potentially go with that. So that would be another example of a quote unquote chemical attack. Again, not getting into the politics of that or the reasons why behind it, who knows, but that's a good example of it. I've also seen it. I had a case or a case study where there was an incident. I don't want to say where and bring people's attention so they can Google it and stuff, but there was a toxic industrial chemical in a playground, blah, blah, blah. We'll leave it at that. And it was certainly a targeted attack where it was a household chemical that caused burns across, young children that were targeted. So again, nefarious in intent, and it affected multiple people. But then you think about, even for the civilian, What you need to do is you need to recognize when something is out of place. You know what normal looks like in your everyday environment. And when that something is out of place, listen to your gut. Don't be in denial and say, I need to recognize that and act appropriately. And a lot of times that's time and distance, right? Putting time and distance between you and whatever that potential hazard or threat is.
Sure. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So when people hear that, the chemical or the biological, I think they tend to jump to that worst case scenario. But in reality, what are the most likely exposure situations that someone is actually going to encounter in just in their everyday life?
It's going to be some sort of an environmental or accidental release. And just think of, in a water treatment plant, it could be chlorine. In, you know, different types of Conyers, Georgia was another type of chemical manufacturing plant that went on fire. I remember many, many years ago, we had in New York State, like it was probably more than 10 years ago, but excessive flooding. And that excessive flooding ended up leading to, um, high levels of water in like fertilizer warehouse. And then all that water with the fertilizer, off gases and creates, another toxic industrial chemical and a hazard and stuff. So realistically, what people are concerned or should be concerned about is just what is that environmental hazard by you. Another environmental hazard, frankly, that we're going to start seeing again is the wildfires. I'm in New York, and it was the last year or the year before, but the wildfires in Canada were so severe that a couple of thousand miles away, it affected my breathing. I'm a 9/11 responder, and I have some significant issues with that. But I couldn't go outside for 2 days, so because of that wildfire, that hazard. That was in the air. Now, if you're in California or Colorado and people are going out and walking their dogs with a wet towel across their face, that again is that environmental hazard that would lead to poor air quality. So having the ability to, if it gets worse, we need to get out of here now. Having the ability to give yourself pure, clean air is very, very important.
As my most likely chemical exposure or incident is going to be a fire extinguisher because I, for some reason, light my house on fire all the time. So, what type of threat out of the four, the CBRN 4, what would you say is the most misunderstood? Is it the chemical, the biological, the radiological, or the nuclear?
I think they're all misunderstood. And I think if we unpack them all kind of across the board, I mean, just my personal opinion, I think a biological threat is a little bit more difficult to do. I mean, we saw that with Amerithrax, many right after 9/11 and stuff like that, like the weaponization of a biological. Is it possible? Sure. Again, you can go to a Home Depot and make certain things out of certain household chemicals that you can buy. But everybody has these household chemicals in their house. They're in smaller quantities and qualities. So that to me is my brain always goes there, right? It's kind of the space that I'm in. How do I there's people like me that are sitting there saying, okay, how is that nefarious actor going to affect really a crowd? So we've seen that kind of that active shooter phenomena. We've seen that active shooter then go into kind of like that mass ramming phenomena. And then I think, another part of it's more difficult to weaponize a chemical than it is to just, run down a parade with a vehicle. But that's where my brain goes because the potential for hysteria is there when you weaponize a chemical. I think also, like if you talk about radiological dispersal devices, that is something that we've seen in the big cities. And again, not without getting into the details about that, but there are safeguards in place to monitor and measure the amount of radioactive material that leaves New York Harbor, Houston Harbor, LA Harbor, right? To see what that looks like. That would be another incident there as well.
Interesting. So yeah, so I hear what you're saying is that a lot of people have just this fear in their minds that, oh, it's just so easy to have some mass biologic attack or some mass radiological attack, but in real life, there's some safeguards behind the scenes that people probably don't see, and those things probably aren't quite as easy as people think they are, right?
They are, and I have an article. I don't know when this episode will come out, but I'm writing an article that goes up on the MIRA Safety blog. And let's look at like crowds. Like I'm always interested in crowds,
Hmm.
and the big thing that we're going to have here in North America is the FIFA World Cup, and you see that large scale event, and what the US doesn't understand is that the FIFA World Cup, because we're not familiar with soccer, it is a Super Bowl sized event going on every single day in 14 or 15 different cities across North America. And if you're not having a game in your city that day, there's a fan zone. So like you're gonna have first, and it goes on every day for 6 weeks. So every day for 6 weeks in 15 cities across North America, there's a Super Bowl going on. Like that's the level of it. So when you talk about like a soft target, oh, it gets crazier. Wait till I unpack the next piece for you. Right? It, it gets a little bit crazier, but like that's where these, the incident command structure, national incident management system all come together. Like in New York, for example, there's fan zones in New York City, but the games are going to be played across the Hudson River in New Jersey, which is only about 6 miles away. But now you're talking about um, communication across multiple states. Now, to make it even more complicated, and that's this, I love the people that put these things together because 2026 is the 250th anniversary of the United States, July 4th, right? 250 years. Philadelphia is a FIFA World Cup city. Philadelphia, the birthplace of the United States, having a 250th year anniversary celebration. Guess what they're also having on July 4th? A FIFA World Cup game, right? So when you talk
Man.
about
Whew.
when you talk about maxing out your resources as an agency in a group, it's already there. And when we talk about preparedness for your individual citizen, by no means am I saying stay away, have faith in those people there that are meant to keep you safe, but you need to keep, your head on your shoulders as well. And, pay attention to when something's out of place, be on the edge of a crowd, on the inside of a crowd, because, that crowd surge is a real thing, so I kind of went down a rabbit hole there and forgot where we started, but that those types of things complicate things. But in the world that I'm in now, as far as like CBRN is concerned, I look at what those softer targets are. And a guy like me, how do we protect it against that threat that is my world, which is CBRN right now, versus, if I was on a SWAT team or if I was on an intelligence team, so to speak. So.
That makes sense. That really does make sense. So, how do how do exposures to CBRN threats really happen? I mean, what are the primary pathways of exposure that people really need to understand?
So mainly inhalation, and mainly skin contact. And then with that, you should also keep in mind cross contamination is a real thing. So one of the case studies that I talk about when I teach these things is Tokyo sarin gas attack in the early 1990s, right? Nefarious in intent. They released sarin on the Tokyo subway system. And the I guess the civil defense that was associated with that response, they did not act accordingly for 90 minutes. Okay. Actually, I was even greater than I'm sorry. It was 180 minutes. It was 3 hours. So they didn't react and realize that it was a CBRN event for 3 hours. Now, when you break that down a little bit more, people were on the train going to work. This incident takes place, and the people went home. People went to the hospital on their own. People went to work. People went out to different subways. So you talk about the cross contamination across the board there because it wasn't recognized as such so early on. The cross contamination was a real thing. I think, there was hundreds of firefighters that had secondary exposure that was needless, so to speak. So like, kind of controlling that, people are going to be, well, this is insane. I just want to, I said, time and distance are a big thing for you. But when you're exposed to something like that, you're also bringing that contamination elsewhere. Like, if people went to the hospital, now they're contaminating a hospital system, which makes things, even more complicated.
Wow. Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. So I imagine you kind of know what goes on behind the scenes in the US, but you're talking as if there's a plan with like large scale decon and things like that. Like sounds like the obvious next step is that if they're ready for these events, they're ready to keep that cross contamination at a minimum by, I'm guessing, like some kind of large scale decon where you can say, here's the exposed population. Let's not let them touch other people.
They do, right? So again, in my opinion, what I've kind of seen as I was working with some agencies that were prepping, for this World Cup event, and what that they call them a JHAD, Joint Hazardous Assessment Team. And what's interesting of the makeup of that is there's some, typically speaking, the fire department is usually in charge of hazmat and decon, right? Typically, um, fire department or firemen don't have any law enforcement capability, right? So if I'm telling you you can't leave and the fireman has no legal authority to do so, you have to attach it then to some sort of a law enforcement entity in order to affect, number one, people's civil rights like that, but also have some legal authority behind it. You'll also see it too. There's usually like a federal attachment to it as well, probably, FBI or DHS, something along those lines, to kind of keep it, on that federal level. So that's kind of like that cross pollination of them all. So in my opinion, um, what my buddy did back in the 1990s with DevGru was they created like a portable system to decon people. So if you think, about the Navy SEALs in the, 1990s, their mission was VBSS, vessel board search and seizure of, go figure what tanker ships and where they were doing that. But they're shooters first, and they don't have the ability to take, a civil support team with them. So those operators have to be able to decon, whether it be a 6-man, a 10-man, or a 24-man element, and they have to be able to take that with them. So that's what he kind of created at that time, was a speed system that was meant to decon that small group. So a JHAT team will typically have enough to decon a couple of people, the team, and then maybe a couple of people that are exposed. If it starts to kind of go beyond that, when you overwhelm resources, I will then call that a mass decon. And again, New York City being overwhelmed versus, an Olathe, Kansas, those resources will become overwhelmed quicker than in New York City, just based on size and scope. So at that point, when you go into a mass decon is when we would talk about what you were saying, right? You bring in kind of like you would see the old, I call it the car wash,
Yeah,
right?
that's
The
kind of what I
big
was picturing. Sure.
right? And then and again, I'm not personally, I'm not a fan of wet decon. I think there's a better way to do it. But in that instance, it makes sense because of the old adage, right? The solution to pollution is dilution. But then you kind of create with that, you're watering down a hazard. It still has this material. Where does that water go? Blah, blah, blah. So it kind of creates a little bit more of it could create more of a hazard. I'm a dry decon guy. And again, that was something that my buddy figured out way back when, because the SEALs did not have the ability to carry 20 gallons of water with them when they were doing a VBSS, right? Like, it needs to be, kind of quick and to the point. So pros and cons to all systems, right? You need to have a robust, well-rounded system. But when you're talking about mass decon, I'll say we're overwhelming resources. And then again, we're going to bring in that big kind of car wash system that you're going to decon multiple like masses and masses of people. But you got to keep it remember too that again, situation and environment are always going to dictate things. But if you remove your clothing, you're going to get rid of 70 or 80% of the contaminants on you to begin with. Okay. So that's an easy kind of way to decon at that point. But you also have to think about, was there an inhalation hazard associated with that? Is it on your skin? Is it in your hair? Is difficult to decon, et cetera? So, but removal of clothing certainly is a first step.
Got
Yeah,
it.
that's
I,
when
I
you got to
like that.
take that activated charcoal chinchilla bath.
Well, I was going to go. I like that we're talking about what does that effective decon look like, but let's talk about that. Like, what does decontamination actually look like for the normal person outside of a formal response? If I think that I have been exposed, I mean, we're talking most likely is probably chemical, but maybe it's biologic. Those are probably the two most common. But as a normal person, then taking off your clothes, awesome, great advice. So then what's the next step? What are things I should have at home? Is there something that I should go buy right now from the grocery store or Home Depot? Or what are the steps I should take outside of that formal decon to keep myself safe at home if I think I've been exposed to something?
Again, the situation and environment are always going to dictate things, and contamination density will play a role. If we're painting with a broad brush here,
Of
uh,
course.
a wet decon, and again, depending on what's on you, is water the right element for that? Or like you were saying, the old charcoal baths, blah, blah, blah. Like, we can unpack those different things. And again, I don't know what the hazard's going to be on you. So I don't want to tell people to, just douse themselves in water, if that's not appropriate, because, you could potentially, spread contamination, or maybe whatever you're using is reactive to that.
Sure. Yeah.
But I don't know what it is. So, but as a general rule of thumb, right? Soap and water generally will work on most things. Okay. Um, Water will work on most things, right? That solution to pollution is dilution, right? More water, more water, more water. If you think you're exposed, and before you come into your house, right, that decon should take place before you go into your house, right? Let's not contaminate anything else. Um, we have a product, that's a dry decon that comes in wipes and powders, and again, that'll actually. So we're talking about chemicals. Water doesn't neutralize things, right? It dilutes it. Your charcoal, like your old M295 mitts, if that's what you're referring to, right? That's a charcoal based.
Hmm.
That will remove a contaminant, but that mitt then is still hazardous waste. Some of the products that we have will neutralize those chemicals. So, like at the end, that that agent gets adsorbed into the mitt or the powder, and it's neutralized. With the charcoal, it's absorbed. There's a difference between the two. So, three different kind of things that we're talking about there, but at the end of the day, right, removal of clothing, let's limit cross contamination, and some sort of a rapid spot decon in order to address where you think you might be contaminated.
And doing it outside the home, you're saying, is obviously right. Don't go inside with your clothes on and get in your shower, right? That's probably the worst thing you could do.
Correct. And again, like, you have to factor in the environmental part of it now too, right? So, like, if you're in, Maine or Nebraska in November, are you taking a cold shower outside with a garden hose? Right now, you're creating another problem, which could potentially be hypothermia, et cetera. Right. So, like, again, we're talking about a civilian rapid spot decon. Boom, you got to do what you got to do. But if you start to unpack that a little bit more, it's not complicated, but always think about what that next step is. Okay, like, I kind of tie it back to, like, when I do firearm classes. What at the end of the day, what's your goal of a gunfight? You want to win a gunfight. Well, what does win stand for? What's important now? So you can't break that apart into this one giant thing. It's a matter of, okay, what's important now? Firing off a couple rounds. What's important now? Seeing maybe it's calling 911. What's important now? Seeking cover. What's important now? Am I hit? Right. So breaking these things down to little pieces. What's important now in a decon? Right. Am I going to spread contamination? Am I going to make a hypothermic event? Do I have some other sort of medical injury going on now because of what I've been exposed to? So again, at the end of the day, awareness is always going to trump everything. And then you can start to unpack that little by little.
Awesome. So you're saying that all that time I spent running around naked in the sprinklers, I was actually training for a CBRN event as a child.
Correct. Correct. Yeah.
Yeah. Awesome. That's good to know.
Very
Okay.
well done. Very well
Yeah.
done. Yeah.
So, George, what would you say is kind of a piece of CBRN related gear that people commonly get that is a false sense of security versus something that they could get that is actually going to protect them?
I think first and foremost, the important thing to have is a gas mask, right? Like we like to say at MIRA, everybody's got a plan until you get gassed. It's kind of like the old Mike Tyson. Everybody's got a plan until you get punched in the mouth, right? Like
I love
having
that.
having air first and foremost would be appropriate. Okay, not all gas masks are created equal. Um, if you're looking at, are they truly CBRN rated? Are they industry rated? There is a difference between the two there, in that price point. And usually the difference has to do with the seal that goes around the mask itself. Ours are truly CBRN rated, meaning that those very caustic um, vapors, like mustard gas, especially, will not eat through that seal. Some other, they'll claim NBC rated, and they're good for against most hazards. But having a true all hazard mask to me is important. Difference being like, hey, if I worked in a chlorine factory, and we needed an industry mask, and I knew it was never going to be exposed to, mustard or hydrosulfuric acid, then it's okay. But, for an extra, X amount of dollars, not even a lot, you go with the true CBRN rated one because of the unknown hazard at the end of the day.
Uh,
So a gas mask is probably the most important thing that you can have. And then kind of breaking it down from there, right? Like, do you need a haz suit? They're not expensive. They're pretty inexpensive, but, and then again, an appropriate filter. So it's a space that just people can throw a lot of terms out there and make it sound like what you need. But and again, as a civilian, as a lay person, if you don't know what you're looking for, you may not make the right choice. So, we always say in the gear world, right? Buy nice or buy twice, because you always learn about something that like, oh, I wish I would have, kind of gotten that. So, get the truly CBRN rated one, because then you can work, use it for anything. And then you just change the filter on it from a true unknown hazard filter to, a particulate filter if you were, grinding something. But
and I like that because I think a lot of people just go and they kind of tick the box because people know that they're like, yeah, I need a gas mask. Of course I do. But what they do is they go online and they find some Russian surplus gas mask that's $20 and they say, hey, I tick the box. I now own a gas mask. But tell me why that is a terrible idea.
So I'm not a fan of the surplus stuff, for the reason that at one point in time it was probably very good, but you don't know how it was stored and in what condition it was in over the last 5 years or 25 years, right? So like, at the end of the day, it's a life-saving piece of gear. If we equate it to like a tourniquet, I've always recommended you never buy a tourniquet, from Amazon, unless it was one of the standardized COTC, Committee of TCCC, where they regulate that. I know we sell our product on Amazon, but it's branded by us for us, right? Like it's from us. So those military surplus ones, you just don't know how it was stored, right? Was it ever stored, in a Connex box that was dry heat forever, and then that butyl seal starts to crack, when you get it or it's exposed to anything, right? So not a smart move for that. There's other things that you could buy from surplus. A gas mask is certainly not one of them.
And that's actually a really good point because I've always thought it was about the filter. I'm like, well, it's these filters. And I thought just now you were going to tell me, well, because those filters break down. But I never even thought about the fact that the seal itself, which is kind of the money shot, is the thing that could fail. And it doesn't even matter if the filters are good if that seal is going to leak around your face. So, yeah, that's actually really good intel. I never even thought about the fact that people aren't thinking about that piece of rubber or whatever it is Soviet era 1960s rubber and may not seal to their face perfectly.
Gotta remember that military grade is built by the cheapest bidder.
That's right. Lowest cost, technically acceptable.
But again, even if that mask is just stored, for a couple of years, with the seal down, like the seal's going to flatten and then it's not even going to seal against your face. Right. So like at the end of the
Right.
day, that is a life-saving piece of gear. And I would not buy something, in that realm. that would be military surplus, right? Like you need a good filter with it. Again, depending on on what you were going to do. Like you could talk about a filter that could be a fire rated filter. Like I know we have a filter that if you were in an environment like in a building, for example, and there's toxic smoke right from a fire, that will filter carbon monoxide into carbon dioxide, make it breathable for a couple of minutes to escape, right? Specialty filter for a specialty environment, or like, that wildfire environment. So like you don't need a true CBRN filter if you just think that you're going to be in that fire escape mode kind of thing, right? Like there's a couple of different ways to kind of skin that cat. But at the end of the day, the easiest way, for me is, like I said, buy nicer, buy twice. And you just, you go with, an all hazards filter, an all hazards gas mask, and you call it a day.
I like that. So that actually brings up a question then. Is there assuming money is no object here, is there a one size fits all filter? Is there one filter that truly is all hazards, is CBRN, and is a fire smoke rated one? Is there a filter like that? Or am I buying a mask that fits my face and works, and I'm buying a variety of filters for the different hazards I might encounter?
So again, in my opinion, there's not one filter that does every single thing across the board. Okay. Personally, I keep a CBRN rated filter. And then, if I was operational as a police officer still, or if I was uh, news media, right? And I'm working at protest, then you could scale that back a little bit into like your police canister OC spray, kind of thing, because we're pretty sure that known hazard there is going to be OC or CS, and they're also rated for other, organic vapors, etc. But the truly unknown, you would have to wear a CBRN filter. But usually, I don't think off the top of my head that our filter that's designed for smoke and fire will also filter out organic gases and inorganic gases, but it's not going to filter out a mustard gas, so to speak, and be a CBRN rated one. But you're very close. I mean, you're very, very close, and you're just not checking the box like, let's say, in like like in a VX and a mustard with an industry filter that would also filter out, smoke and stuff.
Okay. And I like that Chris brought that up, because this is the one thing that people are like, okay, well, I just go tick the box and buy a gas mask. And I'm glad you said gas mask is the thing. Now, if I buy once, cry once, I buy a nice gas mask that I like, and I would like you to kind of unpack what are the things I want, what are the things I don't, as far as visibility and things like that. But are the filters very interchangeable? I think it's like that 40 millimeter seems like a standard thread pattern or something. Can I buy one gas mask and then buy a couple of different filters if I need them, or backup filters, and they just screw onto this and I'm good to go? I own one really awesome gas mask, and it's probably all I'll ever need.
They're usually a standard at 40 millimeters across the board. Some of the other, like the ones that you could buy on Amazon or something like that, they won't be a 40 millimeter. They might be that bayonet style or something else, and you might need two filters at that point. But if you've got a quality gas mask, 40 millimeter cartridge, like on our mask, for example, I wouldn't screw in two of them. You're not getting double the protection. I mean, you are technically, but you don't need that. But the breathing resistance would be greater, and you're just really not getting that extra part of it, right? So at the end of the day, standardizes that 40 millimeter canister across the board. And then you could swap those out. They would be interchangeable with other 40 millimeter canisters from different manufacturers, et cetera, blah, blah, blah. But it's that normal screwing thread one versus, you might go to Home Depot and, buy something that if you're sanding drywall, kind of thing, it's a little bit different of a particulate filter, so to speak.
Okay, no, you did answer my question. So I think the only other thing about the mask that I think of is visibility. You see ones that have the two tiny little eyes that look really sinister and cool, but I think that visibility is a huge issue. Is there a reason why I would choose one over the other versus just the visibility? Is there impact rating that goes along with that or something? What are the other things I would look for in a gas mask if I'm looking to go buy that one mask I'm going to buy and use forever?
So, well, I could talk about our product suite. So, as a generalization, right? The big mass with the larger convex dome across the front of it, a larger field of view. Okay, but because it's convex like this, if I was going to cheek weld a rifle, you're not going to get that seal that you would have on a normal, buttstock rifle with an optic on it. Okay,
Oh,
because there's a convex curve there. um, when you see the dual eye ones, right, there's a trade-off for everything. Okay. Like, what I gain in one area, I lose in another area. So I gain visibility in this, but I lose the ability for a solid cheek weld on a rifle, right? Like that wouldn't be my choice as an operator, right? If I had to, work in a firearm environment. On our mask with the dual eyes, it will fit night vision goggles almost perfectly, right? Like, so I can drop those goggles down onto that and get that I'm still looking through the tubes, but I don't have to worry about the big convex vision there. And without it, with the goggles up, I can cheek weld a rifle. We have a mixed one in there, right? On ours, on the CM8M. So the 6M went like this, the
hmm
7M went like this, the 8M goes like this. And again, I can wear it with a helmet. I can bring goggles down on it. I can pop it up, and then I can also cheek weld a rifle there. So again, depending on what you want it to do at the end of the day, um, it's how are you going to operate in that environment? But for most civilians, the 6M almost really is a flagship for us because it's such a good product at, a reasonable price point. And if you're not worrying about having to, kick in a door and go serve a search warrant in a gas mask, that is, more than enough for you. It's CBRN rated. And then at the end of the day, are you really going to be cheek welding a rifle in order to, survive? Or is it a toy for you at that point that you want to, train with it? Then you might want to, upgrade from there. But
okay, awesome. No, I really appreciate breaking that down because those are things I honestly did not know. And so for people listening at home, what you were saying is that CM6, the 6M is like a full face shield, and then the CM7 is the little tiny goggly eyes, but there is some practicality there if you were in more of a tactical environment. See, I always thought the exact opposite. I'm glad you broke that down because I always thought that it was all about, in a tactical environment, you would want more visibility. And I assumed the only reason they did just the little tiny openings was more of an impact thing, that if you got into an impact situation, that the larger face shield was more likely to break. So I appreciate you breaking that down for us. That makes a ton of
yeah,
sense now.
ours are all impact rated. I think they're at that anti level.
hmm
And they are impact rated across the board. But again, it's yeah, certainly in a tactical environment, field of view, is a big thing, right? But there's the 7M and the 8M, which I'll call the more tactical style for us. The 8M is kind of that hybrid between the full visor and the goggle eyes. It's more of a visor that kind of comes across like that. And then, I get kind of the best of both worlds where I get, vision, clear vision without, a separator in the middle. And then I can still put on goggles, I can put on a helmet, and I can use a rifle. Might need like a riser on the rifle with the optic, where on the 7M you get a little bit tighter of a cheek weld on that rifle.
It's almost like
Awesome.
picking which helmet you want for Halo multiplayer.
No, I really do appreciate that. That's awesome though. So, I want to shift gears just a little bit because I know we're getting out of time. This is awesome, but I know you've worked as a technical advisor on a couple of films like John Wick, right? That everybody in the world knows, and some other cool stuff. But let's talk shit on Hollywood a little bit. What are the things that you see Hollywood consistently and constantly getting wrong about the CBRN type of threat?
I mean, on the Seaburn side, if I look back and I kind of started to go down the rabbit hole during COVID and started to watch those movies, I guess, I can't remember the name of them off the top of my head, but, or even like listen, you could make Walking Dead a CBRN environment, right? At the end of the day, it's a biological hazard, a biological incident. It's being that whatever it is, the virus is being transmitted, via whatever. There's a lot of fantasy involved in that. I think the other thing too is when you talk about operating in a CBRN environment, number one, it's challenging. Okay. And if you're in a tactical element of that, and then you start to lay all these things layer and make problems compounding. So it's hard enough to operate in an environment tactically. Okay. And then you think about noise signature associated with that. Okay. Next level. And then, okay, what's the next level above that? Let's operate in a low light environment, not a no light environment, but a low light environment. Okay. That's the next layer of complexity. And then if you get good at that, then you could go into a no light environment. Okay. Which would be like night vision goggles, and then layer another level of complexity with CBRN mask and night vision goggles and no light and it's a tactical environment. Like the complexity of that is so great. And again, I think people just assume that you can walk into something like that. But I remember the first time that I tried night vision goggles, and I thought I was very, very competent in the low light environment, a tactical environment. And then when you put me in a no light environment the first time, it was like learn how to ride a bike for the first time again. Like it's such a level of complexity that, it's not simple to do.
I
Interesting.
100% back that
Yeah.
up because sitting pulling Overwatch in mop gear for 14 hours in the Iraqi sun is not something I want to repeat.
You
I
never want to do it.
know not for E3 pay. Um, I know if I don't ask this, our listeners are going to give us a ton of heat. So we have to ask this one at least. When we're talking about nuclear fallout, radiation, things like that, what do people misunderstand most about radiation exposure? I mean, is fallout typically more dangerous than the initial event, or is it the nuke the actual event that to be worried about?
So again, let's break that apart into a couple of different things, right? So like nuclear fallout, we can call nuclear fallout like Fukushima.
Hmm.
Okay, so people might be familiar with like Fukushima. We'll call that a nuclear incident, right? And there was nuclear fallout with that. This weekend, believe it, I was writing another blog article for it. It'll come out in the next couple of days. But this weekend is the 40th anniversary of Chernobyl. Okay, so again, nuclear fallout with that, like as hazardous as that incident was, the real problem with it was the longevity of it, right? Like it's still restricted space, it's still contaminated. Um, I don't like to think, I mean, maybe I'm just naive about it, thinking about a nuclear war, so to speak. But I think, if you talk about an RDD, a radiological dispersal device, that was to kind of be activated in a big city, so to speak, right? Like you're going to shut down that city and, for years and years and years, forever. Um, Depending on how long that half-life on that isotope is gonna be, right? Like, think about one on Wall Street, New York City. The economy is, and that wouldn't be something that, like, ISIS is sitting home, "Well, that's a great idea, George." I'm sure they've
Yeah.
thought about it before, but
Sure.
that's why those pieces of the puzzle are in place as far as, detection, protocols. Um, but an RDD is something that's a little bit, I wanna say a little bit easier to kind of, um deploy. I guess they're less conspicuous, right, so to speak. So that fallout from there, depending on the size of the dispersal device and how much radiological material is inside of that, how far does that plume go? There's models for that and stuff. But, that at the end of the day, to me, is a more likely scenario, than Russia, let's say, lobbing a nuclear missile into lower Manhattan, so to speak. And I think, again, not getting the politics of this, et cetera, but, if you think about Iran with the ability to potentially make a nuclear device, right? We know that there are nuclear there's nuclear material goes missing sometimes. I wouldn't say often, but it goes missing sometimes, right? And then where does that end up, right? Does that end up in the hands of a nefarious actor that can then figure out how to weaponize it from there? So, that was one of the things that personally, when you hear that state-sponsored terrorism, then they have the potential to make a nuclear device. Just having the nuclear material, in my opinion, and not going down this rabbit hole a lot, but that nuclear material, in my opinion, is certainly something that could change the world again, so to speak.
You're talking about it wouldn't have to be an actual nuclear weapon. It could be a pressure cooker bomb full of medical grade cesium-137.
An RDD, exactly, right? And again, I didn't unpack, what Iran has or had or didn't have, what it was. But again, like that nuclear material is exactly that. Like you're talking about, if you go in and you go into you know, a radiological hospital and they steal the cesium-137, like that's a significant problem. Like there's,
Right.
I know that it's a problem. Like there's things in place for that. I won't go into details about that, but that's a legitimate problem. You can look back. I think I wrote another article, about you know nuclear material going missing over the course of the last 20 or 25 years or so. Some of it gets recovered, some of it doesn't, right? How much of that was nefarious? Probably not much. But does that nuclear material fall into the hands of somebody that is nefarious?
Got it. And not just nefarious, but also smart enough to actually do something with it too, right?
Well, there was the Brazilian. I haven't read about it in a long time, but just a very high level. There was an incident in Brazil in the late 80s, early 90s, where again it was medical grade. It might have been cesium, it might not have been, but they found it. It was glowing. They thought it was makeup, so to speak, and then they ended up with radiation burns and people dying, and and blah blah blah. But that was again I think that was hospital material. The hospital went out of business, if I remember correctly. But that's the type of thing that a hospital goes out of business in a third world country, are there safeguards in place in order for US, UK, France or a Canada to say, hey, that hospital is going out of business? I don't know. I don't know what the answer to that is. There probably is an answer. I don't know what that is, though.
I feel like we're literally writing the next Tom Clancy movie right now. They're like, okay, here's what happens. The hospital goes out of business. There's cesium-135. These nefarious actors, they're in Brazil. Like we could throw this script together pretty easily. But we're coming up on the end of the hour, and I can't believe it's already been an hour. And I think we just need to have you back on to talk more about all this cool stuff. But I do want to plug MIRA Safety because quality products, awesome stuff. They have this. Have you seen their animal arc?
Yes.
It's the little gas. It's like it's a little gas mask tent with little fake grass for dogs. You need 5 of them.
Yes, I need to get the sizes right.
Yeah, but
do you know where that came from? Like, so that came out of when Roman first started, and they were selling gas masks to civilians. He got a phone call from a woman that said, okay, well, what about my kids? And then he was like, oh my goodness, like there's nobody in the right mind that's ever going to leave their child behind in an incident. Right. So then they ended up, getting child's gas masks. Right. So I think we're, if not the only, one of the only people that'll, that have kids gas masks, at our level. But the same thing with a dog, right? Like I did a video. I don't know if it came out yet on our YouTube channel. It'll be coming out at some point soon, but if you have to do a bug out, so to speak, right, you've got to factor that in. Are you taking your pets with you? Because most people now are so, even over the last 20 or 30 years, are so attached to that family pet. You're not going to leave the family pet behind, right? Like it's just from a psychological impact of that. So that's where that came from, was the ability for people to say, hey, I'm not leaving the family dog behind. We're going to take the family dog with us. That's where that really comes out of.
That's brilliant. And as soon as you said kids, I was thinking about the picture from World War I of I think it was a English hospital with the nursery beds set up with gas mask covers over the beds. And I was like, oh, that makes total sense.
It makes perfect sense. Yeah. So, Chris, I think there is a coupon code, right? If anybody wants to go check it out, and we're not getting anything for this. This is, we're trying to just help MIRA spread the word here, but there is a coupon code that if you want to go to MIRA Safety, check out they have awesome gear. Check it out. I don't
Yeah,
remember what the coupon code is though.
it's POD 10. So POD 10. And George, that's 10% off, right?
Yes, correct.
10% off for POD 10 at mirasafety.com. And they have a whole slew of products. Find what fits your needs and what fits your budget and use that code to get 10% off. But fantastic people, fantastic product line. And I've got a bunch of MIRA Safety stuff at home, actually.
I have a MIRA Safety mask, and it's not one of the ones you mentioned. I think it came in a battle box. Did you guys do a battle box promo at some point?
Not since I've been around.
Okay, I think then I got it somewhere else, but I do have one. I thought it may have come in battle box. I would check it out, but I do have a MIRA Safety. It's more of like an industrial type mask than like the tactical one.
I somehow got a hold of a regulator from MIRA.
Oh, really? Interesting.
And I don't know where it came from, but it's probably 20 years old, and it's an old school MIRA regulator. So, George, I really do think this has been one of those conversations that shifts how people think about preparedness at kind of that foundational level. And we really do appreciate you taking the time to break this down in a way that's actually usable for our listeners.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Right. And just start somewhere, like if it means going to the grocery store this week and you buy some, you buy some extra canned goods that you can keep in your house kind of thing. You start somewhere. We will have in the very near future on our website some resources for people to download, et cetera, to kind of start that journey. And again, just sometimes it's an intimidating topic, so people don't know where to start. So we'll have that. We'll have a university platform for people to also learn more about and stuff. So
that's awesome. And you said you've got some articles and some YouTube videos, and we have a blog that we publish with every single one of our episodes that has all the things we talked about and all the references. So we'll get those links from you, and we will post those on our weekly blog that we blast out to our listeners, obviously with this podcast as well.
Cool.
And George, before we go, did you have any questions for us?
I do, actually. So I want to ask you, what do you enjoy about this preparedness space? Why did you do it? What do you like about it?
Ooh, big question. You start, Chris.
Well, I've got jumping back in the Wayback Machine. One of my very first squad leaders when I was in the Army. His name is J.L. Taylor, and we were getting the absolute dog snot smoked out of us. But he said something that stuck with me, and it's always carry yourself as if you're fighting for someone, because you may not know who you're fighting for. And I've always kind of carried that with me. So I always want to do my best to help people. And after getting with AC and figuring out kind of a plan here, if this podcast helps to save one person's life or helps to get one person more prepared so that they can get to work and not have a bad day, or just prevents catastrophe from happening in just one person's life, then that's job done. Move on to the next job. And the more people we can help, the better off I feel about it. So that's why I'm here. AC, I know you're going to feel similar, but why are you here?
Yeah, for me, it's interesting. I have been a prepper and a bit of a homesteader for a long time. And when my friends come over, or close family, and they always see the things I'm doing, whether it's, the chickens or the garden or the bees or the alternative energy stuff I work on, people are always like, how did you do that? Or I'll get a phone call a couple weeks later and somebody, hey, can you help me set up solar at my house or something? Or there was always just people saying, like, you have a lot of good information, and I am not really good at stuff. I've never thought of myself as someone who's very good at things. And it just got to a point where people were asking me more and more, like, hey, how did you do that thing? And I thought, well, gosh, I guess maybe there is some good information that I have up in my meat locker. And Chris kind of helped me put it together, where we said, let's start a podcast and start talking about those things. What are the things that Chris and I both have knowledge about that can help people be a little more prepared. So I think that's just for me kind of why I'm doing this. I've always been into preparedness as long as I can remember, but it was the validation from other people saying, you should actually tell people about some of these weird things that go on in your head. And here we are, and it's actually kind of worked out.
Cool. For me, I would say, I learned a long time ago that no one is coming to save you, right? Like,
Yeah.
no one's coming to save you. Been there as the responder, and you don't get to everybody,
Yep.
sometimes. So you just got to be in a position to help yourself. I know that there are plenty of people that are much further along in this journey than myself or even you guys, so
Of course.
you're always in a position to learn, and that's based on, always improve your position. So, I look back to I don't even know if you guys were born yet, but Y2K was 1999 into the year 2000.
Hmm.
And, saying to myself, we thought, the grid was going to shut down. So I was like, okay, how do I make water? And I remember buying, a charcoal filter at like a camping supply store, but I had to start somewhere. You had to kind of start somewhere, and then just, throughout the journey, it's like, okay, you know what? I think I've solved that problem. Let me move on. What's the next problem that I could have? So that was it for me, like just always, no one's coming to save you. Do the best you can to save yourself. And as long as you're trying, then you're doing something.
You are your own first responder and expect to self-rescue.
Yep.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. My son
Absolutely.
tattooed that on his forearm. Expect to self-rescue.
I love that.
I did, yeah.
Well, George, again, we greatly appreciate you coming on. George Sichler from MIRA Safety. And come back next week, listeners, for a completely new direction, like always. But until then, remember, you are your own stakeholder. We'll see you then.